2. Background of Germanism. Germans are an execrable people. They think and dream of nothing but chicanery. Their great joy consists in fault finding, shrieking, and threats. They brandish arms which are like barbed clubs. From their mouths, instead of ordinary human speech, issue the rumbling of artillery and the clash of steel. Their life is one of perpetual explosion. The German does not live on the heights. He avoids light, and from his hiding place he picks to pieces treaties, exercises his malign influence on newspaper articles, pores over maps, measures angles, and traces with glowing eagerness the lines of frontiers. To love their country is for them to despise, flout, and insult every other country. They are capable of little else but cheating and lying, even to themselves. They meddle in everyone else's affairs, poking their nose into matters that do not concern them, criticizing everything, bossing everything, and lowering and distorting everything. What a pity that 23 centuries after Socrates and Plato, 2,000 years after Christ, the voice of men like these should still be heard in the world. Worse still, that they should be listened to, and worst of all, that any one should believe them. Country for them is an isolated organism, and they admit it is possible for them to live and breathe in an atmosphere of haughty contempt for their neighbors. They conceive of country as a permanent element of disillusion, like a devouring and insatiable monster, a beast of prey, whose one function is to plunder. All that it does not possess, it has been robbed of. The universe belongs to it by right. Whoever attempts to escape its tyranny is a rebel. This jingo country, this bloodthirsty fetish, of which they are the champions, they endow with the capriciousness of potentates, when it suits their purpose, with every marvelous and charming attribute. Whoever does not at once agree with their extravagance is a barbarism. You must love their country in full armor, like dervish-like celebrations and howls, eyes shut and body trembling with ecstasy. A deaf ear must be turned to the rest of the world on its failings. Everything that it is not must be hated. Hate is sacred. Love and hate are in connection with your country, two terms proceeding from one condition of mind. For them, industrial progress is not a happy sign of national prosperity, but a means of domination. Geography is not the science of the earth, but a mere revelation of the boundaries between which are elaborated strategical schemes of conquest. Every neighbor is of necessity a jealous one, and the enemy who is vigilant is jealous too. The world is populated by hyenas, crouching on the plots of earth from which they ought to be dislodged. The German has decided that his race has been elected by God to order the modern world. Anyone who resists him will be an arrogant usurper who ought to be crushed. The German professes to want peace, but it may be his own sort of peace, after the pattern of the Persian satraps, who, out of love for peace and concord, throws everyone to the lions who dares dispute him. His voice is raucous and resounding. He does not argue, but makes sweeping assertions and lays down the law. At the first sign of resistance, he grows crimson in the face and has resource to thunder and lightning. He holds forth on the authority of a sacred, categorical imperative, which stands in the stead of truth and order. He respects nothing and no one. Should he find himself confronted by the law, he says that it needs reforming. Ministers are mere clerks to be used as pawns in his maneuvering. He is exacting and cantankerous. Whoever undertakes to shout with him never shouts loud enough. To give in to him means becoming enlisted as his civil agent. He is an agitator and swashbuckler. He dips his pen in gall, and he sets in motion with his antics the marionettes which appeal to the nation and may come to conquer it. The fundamental superiority of the German race, the necessity of expanding German prestige in all quarters of the globe, of protecting the German wherever he may be found, no matter what he may be, because he bears within him a residuum of the race. That is what the educators of youth, coming down the years in disciplined arrays like battalions crossing the maneuver fields, have never ceased to drum into the popular understanding of the flame of victory rising to the sky will be the signal for it to boil over. A vivid portrait of a Nazi? Emphatically so. And yet, though 30 years have passed since the first written, we can easily discern in the character of the German of that remote period every single trait which characterizes the German madmen of today. Yesterday, it may have been called Pan-Germans. Today, Nazis. Tomorrow, perhaps, Supergerman. Time cannot change the infernal breed, whatever its label. Time merely enlarges the field in which the German can, with ever increasing intensity and thoroughness, practice those monstrous acts which his fevered, war intoxicated brain dictates, and his vile instincts and barbaric, savage soul prompts. If today the urge of his war soul can prompt the German to murder innocent hostages, imagine, if you can, how that same soul will express itself through the thousandfold more fanatic Germans of tomorrow. To understand people, the fantastic progress of the Nazis has seemed as meteoric and unexpected as an unheralded bolt of lightning suddenly discharged from the heavens. Others hold tenaciously, with dangerous deception, to the opinion that the Nazi came into power only as a result of the German termed inequities of the Versailles Treaty, and the belief and aims of the Nazis were, and are, merely the result of a contemporary and transient political economic upheaval in Germany. Such opinions gave birth to the most outstanding criminal misconceptions of the Nazi and his party. That after those so called injustices to Germany were remedied, the Nazi would vanish from the scene by his own accord, or the German people would rise up in revolt against him. Such misconceptions of his origin, structure, and purpose were eagerly fostered and disseminated by the Nazis themselves. We know how belief in them has already led a dozen nations to their doom. And yet, not so long ago, a prominent member of our Congress arose and declared that the Nazi ideal of world domination was a fantasy and advised Americans to dismiss the avowed aims of the Nazis as fabulous myths. Such utterances are not only born of incredible stupidity, but, if not downright traitorous, are extremely dangerous, for they tend to blind people to those stark realities which they must face firmly and honestly if they are ever to successfully combat them. 2. Such beliefs tend to diffuse among our people the same indifference, lethargy, and irresponsibility which permeates the people of those nations which, one by one, fell victim to the German peril. These nations found that the German peril was not a myth. The sufferings of their people are the best description of the German character, methods, and final aims. By thus helping to create the impression of his transiency of character and purpose, and by promoting propaganda proclaiming his ever imminent downfall, the Nazi knew full well that those nations would incorrectly gauge the strength and deprecate the durability of his party, and what was and is infinitely more important, would fail to correctly interpret the growth and aims of the Nazi as being compatible to and not at variance with the German character. A bud whose nourishment is drawn not from an isolated branch, but from the very roots of the German soul. For it must be patent now that while all the Germans may not approve of the means being employed by the Nazis in achieving German world domination, they are practically unanimous in agreeing that the goal must now, or in the future, be definitely achieved by Germany. Were the German nation to win this war, not one German would hesitate laying claim to a share in the loot. But losing the war, they intend to be ready to disclaim individually the actions taken by them collectively under their government. Thus they intend to escape, once again, punishment for their crimes. Then defeat will on no account erase their desire to conquer and rule the world. There is only one way to frustrate such a desire. The goal of world domination must be removed from the reach of the German, and the only way to accomplish that is to remove the German from the world. Therefore, it is most essential that we realize as an irreconcilable fact the truth that the Nazis are not beings existing apart from the German people. They are the German people. For to the German, Nazi or not, the mailed fist is stimulating and meaningful as symbol of the aims and aspirations of his nation as the Statue of Liberty is to the American. Make no mistake about it, world domination is not a mirage to the German. It never was, and so long as Germany exists as a nation, it never will be. A belief to the contrary, if too long sustained, may well result in the world's enslavement by the Germans. As fantastic and as cyclonic as Nazi accomplishments might seem, it is still more fantastic to note as the fact that in the entire annals of history, no doctrine ever existed which has all its major beliefs so clearly defined, its methods so concisely detailed, and its aims so vividly, comprehensively, and boldly stated beforehand. It is in every respect a deliberate, ruthless, calculated plot to rule the world or, failing that, to annihilate it. And so long as the German nation exists, it intends, in one form or another, now or later, to bring about just a catastrophe. The unfortunate neglect displayed by the various governments in preparing for the cataclysmic events brought about by the German Nazis becomes all the more startling and tragic when we examine records existing by the thousands and emanating solely from unbiased German sources, some written so far back as 50 years ago, clearly indicating the precise course of procedure to be someday adopted by the German in his march to world conquest. These documents are not pedantic treaties expressing theories or extravaganzas detailing in fables or fancies. They are substantial, sober outpourings from the very soul of Germandom, and as such they define lucidly its structure and interpret frankly its yearnings. Moreover, these records are so exact in their theme and comprehensive in their scope that the Nazis have adopted and embraced them almost ad verbatim. In searching through these original papers, one is struck by the realization that Mein Kampf is nothing more than a clumsily written hodgepodge collections of the writings, opinions, and teachings contained in these records expounded by Germans years before Adolf Schicklgruber was born. As we shall see later, even Hitler's much publicized mystical prophecies and his timetables of conquest are merely reprints of those published too long before his time. If Hitler was able to make such rapid strides in resurrecting again that monstrosity that is Germanism, it was only because the German people, long before his birth, had already become completely instilled with each and every principle and precept, with every yearning and desire which he himself later came merely to express and advocate. The poisonous wine of destruction has long before been distilled. Hitler is merely the agent decanting the poisonous fluid from its bottle, which is the German war soul, into the jug that is world humanity, the detailing those ingredients which combine to constitute the toxic formula of Germanism the author shall quote, wherever confirmation of his statements may be deemed advisable, principally from German sources. For after all, no one can explain the German so well as he himself. He has made no secrets of his character, his ambitions, and his intentions. By his acts, he has himself bared his heart and soul. By his words, by his own hand, he will some day come to dig his own grave. It is not to be wondered at that the nations of the Western world regard the avowed program of the German for world conquest and dominion with a great deal of amazement and incredulity. For such an idea is entirely alien to those basic principles and instincts of the Western civilization which painfully and gradually arose out of the chaos of the past thousands of years. Such civilized nations regard individual rights, the sacredness of human life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness as the virtues of mankind and itself the individual states as a guarantor of those rights. And though at one time or another nations may have sought political and economic adjustments, even territorial aggrandizement through force of arms, it must be noted that no Western nation has ever made such a religion of war, such idolatry of armaments, and such a cult of mass murder and destruction as has Germany and her peoples. According to her own writers, teachers, and statesmen, Germany has but one great reason for existing, that of achieving world dominion. Since that is its highest aim, therefore, Germany constantly claims that it has every right to make free and liberal use of chicanery, deceit, intolerance, lust, persecution, and oppression in order to achieve that goal. Consequently, such a perverted nation, such a state of human negotiation, views its vice as being the only true virtue in life, whereas to the Germans, the virtues that they know and may be practiced by the rest of the world are merely vices due to the latter's decay and degeneration, as though there exists anywhere in the world a nation which can boast of degeneration in the same degree as Germany. The primary reason which stirs German lust for world dominion was best summarized by a German professor who declared that since Germany will never be able to understand the world, the latter must be conquered and reformed so that it will be able to conform to German thought. It is just such mass megalomania, crass egoism, intellectual aberrancy which stirs the demented brain of the German of yesterday to foment his wars, which animates the insane Nazi in continuing those wars, and which will, if the schizophrenic Teutons continue to exist, direct the policies and actions of any party in control of Germany in the future. For, to reiterate, the German idea of world domination and enslavement of its peoples is no political belief. It is a fierce and burning gospel of hate and intolerance, of murder and destruction, and the unloosening of a satanic bloodlust. It is, in every literal sense, a savage and pagan religion which incites its worshippers first to a barbaric frenzy and then prompts them to vent their animal ferocities in the practice of every horrible, ruthless, and unmentionable atrocity upon innocent man, woman, and children. Such are the true German virtues, and the world will feel their sting so long as they continue to tolerate Germany and her people on the earth. For those Germanic traits are the same as those which, emanating from the German soul, animate the German tribes of yore. We have but to examine the developments of those tribes to perceive just to what extent within the German soul the German ideal of world conquest and dominion really lies. The German slaveholding tribes were noted for their unnaturally passionate love of war and destruction. Seek, a noted German historian, writes with pride that the Germans of ancient days were noted for their villainy and treachery, and, quote, their faithlessness became almost proverbial with the Romans, end quote, who found that the Germans were adept at breaking pact or peace whenever it best suited them to do so. Lamprecht, another German historian, recounts that even among themselves the Germans held no pledge valid. Is it so much to be wondered, then, that a people who distrust one another would hesitate at double-crossing any of its fellow nations? Those ancient Germanic tribes, like the people of modern Germany, were unable to assimilate and accept the humane ideals, civilized aims, and social aspirations of their neighbors as constituting the desirable, natural goal of life. Quote, warlike, as then have the Germans ever remained. End quote. We can understand, therefore, why to a German peace is not an objective, but merely an interlude to be used by him to prepare for a war in which he can assuage the thirst for mass murder which burns in his soul. The German has absolutely no regard for life. There is no such expression in his language as, quote unquote, sacredness of human life. It would be impossible, even between the covers of 1,000 volumes, to list and describe the demonic brutalities practiced by the Germans upon innocent peoples. And though records of the last war are replete with numerous and actual incidents illustrating the innate cruelty and viciousness of the Germans, we have but to refer to one recent occurrence, the sinking of the British vessel Lancastria, to realize just how and why the German earns his reputation for such cruelty and viciousness. For assuredly, after sinking a vessel, the aviators of no other Western nation would have deliberately and cold-bloodedly dropped incendiary bombs on the oil-covered water which surrounded the ship in order to roast alive the desperate women and children struggling below, but the German aviators did not hesitate to do so. It must have been with a perverted gleam in their mad eye that they boiled those women and children alive in oil. This from a modern and self-styled cultured nation, a nation whose press heralded such cannibalism as an illustrious example of German courage and heroism. Such is the quote unquote master race of the world.